Your brother earned the new car. He actually visits, Dad said as he handed me the shocks. I just smiled and replied, cool. Then he can cover your bills this month. The next day I pulled my name off their utilities and watched the panic begin. Hey Reddit. Growing up, it was always obvious that my brother was the golden child. I was the one who stayed home, picked up the slack, paid bills when my parents came up short, helped fix broken pipes, bought groceries, and generally kept everything afloat when things got rough. My brother, on the other hand, showed up twice a year, once on Thanksgiving if we were lucky, and once at Christmas to scoop up whatever gifts and praise he could before disappearing back into his own life. Despite all that, my parents, especially my dad, never hesitated to remind me how much more valuable my brother was. Apparently, visits packed with empty promises and hugs for show were worth a lot more than consistent, quiet support. Last week, it hit a breaking point. I had just gotten home from a brutal shift, my back aching and my wallet feeling thin, when my dad called me outside. Sitting in the driveway was a shiny new car, a full upgrade from the beaten-up sedan my brother usually drove. Dad handed me a couple of boxes filled with car parts, saying he needed help installing shocks on their old truck. I didn't even get a hello. As he passed me the boxes, he said, almost offhandedly, that my brother had deserved the new car because at least he visited. Like the time, money, and energy I poured into supporting them didn't matter because it wasn't flashy enough to parade around during the holidays. I stared at him for a second, absorbing the casual cruelty of his words. Then I smiled. Not a forced or polite smile, but the kind of smile you give someone when you've already made a decision that they don't even know is coming. I shrugged and said, cool. Then he can pay your bills this month. Dad blinked at me, maybe realizing a little too late that something was about to shift, but he said nothing. He just turned and walked back inside like nothing had happened, expecting me to get to work on the truck like the dutiful daughter I was supposed to be. That night, as they sat comfortably inside watching TV, probably bragging about the new car to whoever would listen, I was at my computer going through every utility account linked to my name. Water, electric, internet, gas, all tied to my credit, all drafted from my bank account. Because when things got tough a few years ago, they had asked for help and promised it would just be temporary. Temporary had turned into indefinite, of course, because I made it easy, but not anymore. That night, I wasn't just cutting off payments. I was cutting the cord that kept me tethered to their expectations. The next morning, before they even woke up, I made the calls, pulled my name and payment info from every account, set disconnection notices where necessary, canceled autopay. It was a little like taking a pair of scissors and snipping 1,000 tiny invisible threads that have been holding me down for years. I packed a bag, took my laptop, my important documents, and walked out the door without looking back. I didn't slam the door or make a scene. I just left, quietly, calmly, like a storm pulling away from the shore, leaving wreckage behind. It was the kind of silence that said more than a screaming match ever could. By noon, the panic had started. First, it was a few missed calls, then frantic texts from my mom. Why was the internet down? Was the water pressure low because the water was shut off? Did I know anything about this? They needed my help now. My dad, predictably, went from confusion to anger in about 5 minutes flat. The last text he sent just said, "You better fix this." I read it, smiled again, and put my phone on silent. I could almost picture him pacing around the living room, red in the face, clutching his precious phone as if barking demands into it would somehow summon me back. By evening, my brother had gotten involved. Apparently, Dad called him and expected him to swoop in and fix everything the way I used to. But the thing about my brother is, he's all about appearances. He wasn't about to fork over his own money to cover someone else's bills unless there was a photo op involved. So instead of stepping up, he bailed. He told them he was too busy. Maybe he could help next week. And even then, he made no promises. They were stunned, shocked even. It had never occurred to them that their golden child would leave them high and dry when things got ugly. Meanwhile, I was sitting comfortably at my friend's apartment, sipping coffee, feeling more free than I had in years. No more being the backup plan. No more carrying the weight of a family that didn't respect me. No more being the invisible support system they took for granted. I should have felt guilty. A tiny part of me, the part that had been trained for years to put their needs above my own, stirred a little. But it was drowned out by the overwhelming peace I felt, a peace I hadn't tasted in a long, long time. I knew deep down that if I had stayed even one more day, they would have drained me dry without a second thought. Later that night, as I was lying on the couch, my mind wandered back to all the years I had sacrificed for them. The jobs I had taken just to pay their debts, the vacations I canceled because there was always another emergency at home, the friendships I had let wither away because my parents made me feel guilty for having a life outside of their problems. I realized that my whole existence had been built around patching holes in a ship that they were too lazy to fix themselves. It wasn't just about the bills, it was about every ounce of energy they had stolen without apology. The next morning, I woke up to a new wave of messages. This time, it wasn't just my mom, my aunt, my uncle, even a few family friends had chimed in. Apparently, my parents had been busy painting me as the villain, the ungrateful daughter who had abandoned her poor, aging parents in their time of need. They begged, guilt-tripped, even tried to shame me into coming back. It would have worked once upon a time, but now reading those texts, all I felt was a hollow sort of sadness. Sadness that they couldn't see past their own entitlement to recognize that I had been bleeding for them for years. That afternoon, I walked down to the local notary office and finalized something I had been thinking about for months. Removing my name from their emergency contacts, severing my cosigner obligations, even shutting down the joint account they had begged me to open to make paying bills easier. Every document I signed felt like a small, decisive funeral for the life they had chained me to. I wasn't just stepping away. I was closing the door, locking it, and tossing the key into the deepest ocean I could find. As night fell, I received one final message from my mom. It wasn't angry. It was desperate. It simply said, "Please come home. We don't know what to do. We need you. Not your brother. You." For a moment, I stared at the screen, the weight of all those years pressing against me. But then, just as quickly, I set the phone face down on the table. Because for once, their emergency wasn't my responsibility. For once, I wasn't going to run in and save them from the consequences of their own choices. And as I sat there feeling the full, heavy silence of a life that was finally my own, I knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. They thought the utilities shutting off was bad. They had no idea what was coming next. The next few days were strangely quiet. After the initial flurry of desperate messages and blame shifting, it was like my parents had gone radio silent. I knew them well enough to understand what that meant. They were hunkered down, stewing, planning, trying to figure out how to manipulate the situation back into their favor. For a brief moment, I almost expected them to show up at my friend's apartment, demanding answers or spewing guilt. But they didn't. Maybe for the first time, they sensed that the old tricks wouldn't work on me anymore. Meanwhile, life without them weighing me down was better than I ever imagined. I had money left over after paying my own bills. I had time to think about what I wanted for once. I applied for a better job, started working out again, even reached out to some old friends I had drifted away from because I had been too busy playing the family savior. Every small act of independence felt like reclaiming a piece of myself they had stolen over the years. I didn't realize just how much of my identity had been wrapped around being their fixer until I was finally free. But freedom, as I learned, came with its own challenges. One evening, about a week after I walked away, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered it. It was my dad. His voice was strained, brittle, like he was holding himself together with duct tape and pride. He told me that they were behind on bills, that the internet was still down, the water was about to be shut off for good, and the car insurance had lapsed because they had relied on me to pay it for so long. He didn't ask me to come back. He demanded it as if it was still my obligation, as if nothing had changed. I listened quietly, feeling strangely detached, like I was observing a play rather than living through it. When he was done ranting, I took a deep breath and asked him a simple question. I asked him why he thought I owed them anything. There was a long pause. I could almost hear the wheels turning in his head, struggling to come up with an answer that didn't sound selfish or entitled. He muttered something about families sticking together, about children honoring their parents, about gratitude for the roof they had provided over my head growing up. I let him finish, then told him calmly that gratitude did not mean servitude, that a roof over my head when I was a child wasn't a gift. It was the bare minimum a parent owed their child. That honoring family did not mean sacrificing my life for people who only saw me as a bank account with a heartbeat. Then before he could argue, I hung up. After that call, something shifted permanently. They realized I wasn't going to come running anymore. No more late-night rescues, no more picking up the pieces of their bad decisions, no more sacrificing my mental health, my finances, my future to prop up a family that never truly valued me. A few days later, my aunt sent me a message letting me know that my parents had finally reached out for help, not from me, but from a social service agency that could actually assist them. She sounded almost bitter about it, like it was some great humiliation for them to admit they needed outside help. I felt no joy in hearing it, but I felt relief. They were finally being forced to stand on their own 2 feet, even if it took hitting rock bottom to get there. Meanwhile, my brother, the so-called golden child, kept his distance. Turns out, it was one thing to show up for a few holiday selfies, and another thing entirely to stick around when the credit cards were maxed out and the electricity was getting cut. He made it clear he wasn't willing to foot their bills or rearrange his life to bail them out. In a strange way, I almost felt sorry for him. He had been given the pedestal, but none of the tools. He had never been expected to step up. So when the time came, he simply couldn't. My parents had built him up into a fantasy, and now they were paying the price for living in it. A few months passed. I moved into a small apartment of my own, decorated exactly how I wanted, with no nagging voices telling me I was wasting money or being frivolous. I bought furniture secondhand, cooked my own meals, and paid my own bills. It was modest, but it was mine. And more importantly, it was peaceful. No slammed doors, no passive-aggressive comments over dinner. No sense of obligation chaining me to a life I never chose. For the first time in years, I could breathe deeply without feeling like I was drowning in guilt and expectations. One afternoon, I ran into an old family friend at the grocery store. She looked at me like she had seen a ghost. She asked if it was true that I had abandoned my parents, that they were struggling without me. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "No, I didn't abandon anyone. I just stopped letting them abandon me." She didn't know how to respond to that. She mumbled something and wandered off, leaving me standing there with a strange sense of peace. I realized then that the world would always have its opinions. People would gossip, would judge, would paint their own versions of the story. But at the end of the day, they hadn't lived my life. They hadn't carried the weight I had carried, and they had no right to tell me how I should feel about putting it down. In the end, walking away wasn't about punishing my parents. It wasn't about revenge or bitterness. It was about survival. It was about choosing to live my own life instead of being trapped in a cycle of endless sacrifice for people who mistook my kindness for weakness. It was about finally understanding that love without respect is just manipulation in disguise. It took me far too long to learn that lesson, but now that I had, there was no going back. The last text I ever received from my parents came 6 months later. It was short. It said, "We hope you are well. We miss you. No demands, no guilt, no begging." Just a quiet acknowledgement that the dynamic had changed forever. I didn't reply, not because I hated them, but because I loved myself too much to reopen a door that led back into darkness. Some things, once healed, should never be broken again. And as I sat in my tiny apartment that night, lights twinkling outside the window, sipping a cup of tea in complete and utter peace, I realized something powerful. I hadn't lost a family. I had found myself, and that above all was worth everything I had walked away from.